Welcome back to Built Different from HiQ. I'm here with Christian Bonadio. Christian, before we get into today's topic, last week's conversation with Danny Zini from Royal Stacks. What was the standout moment for you?
It was a really good conversation. Great to see you, Harry. Thanks for being here again on this week's mini episode of Built Different. Look, Danny's great. I mean, if you haven't seen the episode, you've got to go and check it out. I think, aside from the fact that he's operating some premium hospitality brands across Melbourne, including Royal Stacks and then the co-op with the Sushi Mango boys at Johnny Vincent Sam's and Sam Weech. The thing that I loved and what was fascinating about the conversation was this idea that Danny wants to create happy workplaces for his teams. And as a leader, he will be very open and overt around saying, I'll create a space where I will absolutely back you to do the things that you're capable of. But there is one condition. And that one condition is that you take some risks, you have a crack and you really go after things and you don't die wondering. And I think that it's a great example for leaders around, mixing this kind of piece around supporting and showing care and creating a happy workplace, but also holding your team accountable for them to hold their end of the bargain as well. So, and it's something that most organizations want to try and identify, but they really struggle to be able to get that balance right.
Yeah, interesting. It sounded like a really good chat, but let's get into it today. Organizations and businesses. What's the specific issues then, problems that you're seeing out there right now?
Well, I think this sort of topic that I just mentioned there around how Danny has focused really hard on trying to drive, being careful and caring for his people and creating a happy workspace, but also ensuring that they know what they have to do and keeping their end of the bargain. I think that's a real challenge that we're seeing in the marketplace at the moment from a talent standpoint. Organizations being able to balance both, this idea that leaders want to be caring for their people. And it's really easy to be caring in really positive environments, build great culture, showcase support, create spaces where people love working for them. But when it comes to leaning into performance challenges or when performances aren't quite meeting, it's where they avoid those conversations. And then the opposite is also true, where you've got really high performing environments where this expectation on what good looks like is very well known and everyone drives and pushes really hard for it, but there's no human centricity to those environments. And what I'm hearing a lot from leaders, founders, HR leaders and the like as well is like, how do they identify and find the balance between both? Because it really is both. It's not only going to unlock great engagement, great retention, but ultimately the performance that the business needs to keep moving forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but why would you say, what is the specific reason that it's so hard to find someone who can actually do both?
I mean, there's so many different reasons, but I think the key one for me is this ability to have the emotional intelligence and self-awareness to understand what it takes to develop this and to have the patience to do it over time. It's super easy, as I said earlier, to be caring when things are going well because things are happening. People are performing because the market is going your way and you've got the wind behind you. The real test is when someone in the team, and especially someone that you genuinely really like and invested time in, who has all the business values and is aligned, starts to underperform. That's the real test as a leader. So what do? Do you have a conversation early on and really hold the line around, hey, look, we love the way that you go about it, but the work's not quite delivering? Or do you take the slightly easier option, which is to perhaps provide more support and just say, well, it's okay, you'll get there, and see nothing changes? That's where most leaders are, I think, right now being found out. And some of this is a build-up of this momentum that we saw a few years back when momentum was good across broader markets, so it was easy to lead. But now when it's a slightly tougher environment and it's a little more uncertain, leaders are being found out a little bit because their culture hasn't given them an opportunity to actually lean into those more challenging conversations.
So then what does a leader who can actually do both look like in practice?
Yeah, look, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've also had this struggle in my own career leading large teams historically as well. But I think there are five kind of things that leaders that I see do this consistently do on an ongoing basis. And the first one, and this has to be the foundation, is they build the vision for their team, for their business, for the ecosystem that they're across with their people, not for them. They don't just say, hey, you know what, I've decided that it's X and therefore your role is to do A, B, and C within X. They are working with their team to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. We want to get towards this direction, or at least that's what I think we want to get to. What do you all think? You're in the weeds. You're doing a lot of the granular work. You're talking to our customers. How do we get this buy-in in terms of creating an environment where everyone feels like they're building the North Star that they can feel connected to, and that makes sense to them? It means a leader can have conversations easier around alignment, misalignment throughout. So, and also you get an organization and the people within it thinking, you know what, this person trusts us. They are asking for our advice. We're feeling like we're connected to it. And I know and can see that this is something that's possible.
That seems like a real sort of very subtle but really important distinction there. Like, what would you say about the other four then?
I think the second thing is really strong leaders. They know that they can separate the person and how much they enjoy being with that person or the investment that they've put into that person with the performance. They can sit across someone much like this or in person and genuinely care about them, but have a direct conversation. And for me, care is about the ability to have direct and clear, comfortable conversations about what is and then also isn't working, without it becoming personal, without it withdrawing care afterwards. The relationship continues to stay intact, even if the feedback isn't exactly what they want. I think the third thing that then flows on off the back of that is setting expectations early on, and setting, it's much similar to what you do when you build the vision, is you set the expectations in partnership with the individual and saying, again, we know where we're going. Your role is responsible for X. What do you think the expectations are? And let's agree on those. And you might have a little bit of back and forth as to getting the alignment on what those shared expectations should look like. But once they're there, you then work towards those. And you don't wait for performance to slip before defining what good looks like. You set it up early. You, especially when you're talking about new starters or new members in the team or people doing new roles, you set it back. And then anyone that says that being vague is a way of showing care, I'd say you're a little bit off the mark here. So it's about really being clear and consistent on what those expectations are. Make sure they're objective and definable so that you can then connect back to it based on the results. The fourth is then the consistency. So you then hold this standard on an ongoing, consistent basis. So making sure that you have a rhythm, whether it's weekly catch-ups or bi-weekly catch-ups, that you then connect in on the work to ensure that those things are happening. But you're holding back to the standards and the expectations that have been agreed. Again, remembering that you have set these expectations in partnership with the individual in your team. And you hold the same standard, regardless whether someone's your highest performer or someone you've known for 10 years, because the accountability without consistency isn't accountability. You're just basically managing people's moods and how they're feeling at a particular time. And the fifth and final one, I think, is staying curious. And this is really important. Staying curious and actually being mature enough to understand that if someone's performance suddenly drops off a cliff when they've been consistent, before you go straight in and say, hey, you haven't delivered, it's what's going on? Because this is not like you. How have we gotten to this point where all of a sudden the performance isn't quite where it's been? Is something happening behind the scenes that I'm not aware of? And then get into it. And that's another way of showing really good care, because you're getting in under the skin of it to sort of sense check if the person is okay. And if you can get into that and understand the cause early, it might actually help you correct some things quickly to then ensure that performance gets back to where it was quicker than what you might otherwise think.
Those sound awesome and really great in your theory, but how do you actually know if a leader can do this, like beyond just taking their word for it in an interview?
Yeah, look, I think this is the part that is really important and is the area where I do see a lot of organizations starting to struggle a little bit if they haven't clearly defined what it is that they're going after. But because every leader, any really good leader, average to good leader and above, is going to be able to tell you about how they balance care and accountability. Most of them will have pretty good answers around, how do you handle difficult conversations, or, how do you manage when someone's not quite delivering on a consistent basis, and so forth. So you've got to go a little bit deeper. You have to ask questions that go after real answers, not just simple frameworks that anyone can read off a script, or you can kind of Google or get ChatGPT to give you an answer that's well thought out. So you've got to go deeper and ask for those stories to demonstrate competence.
Like what?
So instead of asking someone how they build a vision, ask them to tell you about a time that they got pushed back from their team around that direction, and then they had to actually start to change tack. What happened? Why? What was the pushback? And what did it make them sit back and think about in terms of how they were developing the vision, so that they could then get that alignment? A leader who can present and calls it collaboration without having a story behind how they've actually collaborated, because collaboration isn't always smooth. It sometimes has a little bumps along the way. Then they're probably just avoiding the answer and the question specifically. Instead of also then asking how they handle difficult conversations, get them to talk to you about a time where they've had to make a tough call on someone and they've had to work through how that person's performance either lifts to a certain standard, or they unfortunately might have to make a decision that means they've got to go in a different direction, because that is really where leadership gets tested. And not just how they go through that process, but how did the relationship at the end with the individual finish up? Someone that genuinely can separate person from performance can often tell you that someone ultimately, if they chose to leave, they left with some dignity and they'd still be a reference. Instead of asking about accountability all the time, you could kind of get them to sort of showcase, well, how did they step someone through that process to realize whether they were right for the role or right for the organization, and then what was the end outcome of there. I think then as well, in terms of asking about someone how they drive accountability, and they tell you about how they held a high performer to the same standard, they can talk to you about how they managed that same standard across all. Even if a high performer was doing it consistently, how does the rest of the team get up to a level that they know that those individuals are capable of, acknowledging that? And that's where consistency gets tested, is that most leaders get exposed. They have a rule for the high performers, and then they have a slightly different perspective and rule for the others. I think the other piece as well, instead of asking how they support, what do they do? Ask them to tell you about that time, like I said earlier, about when performances dropped unexpectedly. So if they can give you some real deep answers to specifically what they did, the interventions that they played, and then what changed both within themselves, but then the individual or the team as a whole, that's really going to tell you a little bit more than just simply getting frameworks to answers.
So you're looking for these leaders, these candidates, when you're speaking to them, to be more specific, real stories, not frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think stories that illustrate impact. Ultimately, I think right now we're in this kind of environment where job seekers are getting very good at talking about a specific narrative. They can tell you about the process relatively well, and they talk in theories. But if they can't necessarily then test that theory against something that they've done, and they can't bring it to life in a way with a specific outcome and about how their intervention was the reason why that outcome went from not being what an organization needed to being what it was that an organization is needed, then you've got to go deeper, because they're not going to necessarily have that breadth of and depth of capability to deliver for you, or at the very least, they haven't been able to articulate it well enough for you.
Yeah, interesting. A really interesting discussion actually about all of that. And would you have any final thoughts for leaders who are either trying to develop this in themselves or trying to hire for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, no one's the finished product, right? So if I think about my own personal experience, the bit that I always struggled with was my vision setting was literally what I thought and delivering it top down. So I think if you're a leader and that's something that you're struggling with, I think start with the vision piece. How do you get everyone into a room and openly say, how do we go about creating something that we can all go after, that we all feel connected to? Because when you have that foundation and it's super solid and everyone's connected, then it enables you to do the other areas and the other things with a lot more ease as well. And then if you're looking for leaders who have that capability to do this right now, I think you've got to stop with the surface level questions and you've got to look for that story behind the answer, following up with a why. If you are starting with more traditional questions, then don't just stop at the first answer. Tell me why. Why did you do that? And then what happened? And what was the outcome? And what do you think you learned off the back of that? Just continue to go deeper, because the best leaders will welcome that conversation. They'll want to get into it. They'll actually be really energized by it. And so the ones that can do both will ultimately be the ones that will help you. And when I say both, they can hold the accountability but create caring and engaged environments. These are the ones that are going to be able to navigate you through the tricky situations that you might encounter in the current market, and then have your team be engaged throughout.
I think that's a great place to land. Christian, thanks so much. Once again, interesting as always. For everyone listening, this is Built Different from Higher Q. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and follow Christian and Higher Q on LinkedIn for weekly insights on the talent market. There's some great stuff on there. Check it out. And we'll see you next week.